to be here with you presenting our work. I'm going to talk about a slightly different side of the story that our colleague Jorgos presented, but hope to bring some insights of our work. So next slide, please. So I am part of Unit 02, and we are composed of 5 teams. So the scientific advice mechanism of the Commission, a team focusing on ethics and research integrity, a team that deals with the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, another one that supports the European Research Council, and then my team that is focusing on science for policy. So next slide, please. So now this is my table of contents, and I'm gonna talk about what do we do in science for policy, why we do it, briefly mentioning the Science for Policy Council conclusions, then how we do it, the milestones that we have, our expected outcomes, who is in our ecosystem, our stakeholders, and the timeline of our activities. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by science for policy? I know that many times there's a lot of confusion because there's science for policy, policy for science, and a lot of combinations of the two. But yeah, we basically are talking about evidence-informed policymaking, and this we understand as the use of the best available scientific evidence, knowledge, and expertise to inform policymaking, aiming to achieve better public policies. And also, we hope that by integrating science into policymaking, governments and organizations can make better informed decisions and develop effective strategies that are grounded in a deeper understanding of complex and interconnected issues. So yeah, that's what we understand by it. Next slide, please. So why are we working on this? You might ask. So yeah, as many colleagues mentioned before, scientific knowledge and expertise are indispensable for accurately describing and effectively tackling the wicked and complex problems the world is currently facing. For example, climate change or biodiversity loss or pandemics, as many mentioned, or even societal polarization. And also, there is a need to ensure that decision makers have access to the best available science when they need it in a format they can use and which is trusted by citizens. That's also, of course, very important. But there are different challenges that maybe prevent this from properly functioning. So I would highlight 4. So first of all, there's a fragmentation of science and policy ecosystems. So in general, organizations rarely coordinate their activities and are often not aware of what the other does. There are also a lack, there's also a lack of meeting opportunities between producers of knowledge, so scientists, and users, policymakers. And then in terms of like the capacity of each of the two groups to understand each other, there is also a limited ability sometimes of scientists to translate findings into actionable knowledge, or knowledge that policymakers can actually understand even. And there's also on the side of policymakers, there's limited absorptive capacity and skills for science uptake, so for understanding that knowledge. So it's a two-side problem. So next slide, please. So um, then with this different problems that I described, the council conclusions of December 23 called, as you can see, strengthening the role and impact of research and innovation in the policymaking process in the union. Very intricate title. So they basically call upon the Commission to play a key role in coordinated actions in science for policy, and they particularly want us to focus on 3 main things. So yeah, further developing the concept of science for policy and improving the cross-cutting integration of scientific evidence and knowledge in public policies. Then also advancing and strengthening the European science for policy ecosystem across sectors and governance at all and at all levels. So also to mention that the European science for policy ecosystem is not something static, but rather what we understand as the umbrella for all the different science for policy ecosystems that are happening or taking place in member states and also beyond. So we don't want to create a new thing, but rather like to host everything to maybe facilitate. And then the third thing that the Commission is called to act upon is promoting the collaboration of networks of relevant actors and foster the identification and exchange of best practices and mutual learning. So next slide, please. So how are we doing all that? So we have two main. Well, I've divided the our actions in two main topics. Like one is like what our ongoing activity, and so also as our colleague Georgios mentioned, we are also carrying out a mutual learning exercise on science for policy. And this exercise is entitled Bridging the Gap Between Science and Policy, and it involves 16 member states and associated countries. And it's basically an engagement process of workshops that build capacity and foster peer learning, and is supported by experts. I mean, that's for all these mutual learning exercises. But yeah, in our case, we're also, of course, I mean, addressing the science for policy angle. And this I mean, our exercise started on June 24 and will end in May 25. And we had 4 meetings in Belgium, Spain, Netherlands, and we'll have one in Poland in February. So we, for example, discussed about knowledge in general to set the scene. Then we talked about roles of science for policy actors, incentives. I mean, all the information is available online. I think I also put the link in the notes so people can access if they want. And then that's what we are doing right now. But then our future action, I mean, we say future because as Jorgos mentioned, is the agenda is not adopted yet, but we will most likely have an era policy action on the upcoming air policy agenda 25-27 on advancing the European science for policy ecosystem. And this is basically giving us the uh, the umbrella to then act on the different dimensions we want to develop. And it's of course co-created with member states, and some of them are really prominent in this science for policy work. So we're very grateful for that. And also these activities will be supported by Horizon Europe tools. So we are trying to mobilize funding for that. Also, things will be unveiled in due time. So next slide, please. Um, okay, I made a mistake. So next, please. Okay, so within this like era policy action and the funding from Horizon, we have three different milestones. So we would like to create a network of national science for policy correspondents. And what we understand by this is a network that will bring together officials working on science for policy in national R&I policy institutions across Europe. So basically our counterparts in member states. And the aim of the network will be to coordinate efforts to mainstream science for policy approaches in their respective administrations and to foster mutual learning across countries. So that's more on the official or policymaker level. Then we would also like to nurture and animate a science for policy community of practice that, working with existing relevant networks, will bring together interested as science for policy actors and stakeholders. And this will hopefully enable the identification of common concepts, challenges, and approaches, and the exchange of information and ways of working and good practices. So we that's the second milestone. And for the third one, we are aiming to create an observatory of the European science for policy landscape and its practices. So this would include a mapping of the current institutional landscape, and also, yeah, as I mentioned, a repository of good practices and use cases, and including analysis of success factors, common challenges of operating at the science for policy interface. So next slide, please. And we have some expected outcomes with all these activities. So first of all, we would like to foster regular dialogue between all these different actors I mentioned before, so the network, the community of practice, and other interested stakeholders. And this dialogue will be to discuss how to create the necessary conditions to enable effective engagement between research and policy, and to support the production and uptake of scientific evidence and expertise in policymaking. We also hope that this will increase trust among science for policy actors and citizens in both science and governance. Um, Also, we would like this to foster some increased peer learning. And with this peer learning, we also hope to increase awareness and improvement of science or policy capacities and skills across the whole spectrum of demand and supply of science or policy, so policymakers and scientists. And also, we would like that collaboration and coordination is strengthened, and it supports also the interconnection of the national science policy ecosystems across Europe. So next slide, please. And yeah, our key stakeholders are, of course, I mean, within the European Commission. I mean, we are DG Research and Innovation, but we collaborate very closely with DG GRC, so the Joint Research Center, and they focus more on the policy making side of things, as in they do a lot of trainings on and capacity building, and we focus more on the research side of things, especially through policy research policy. And also, well, DG Reform is another DG that provides some funding to support GRC's activities, and also inside in-house science for policy, or colleagues working on science for policy inside the Commission. Also, we work very closely with the Council. I mean, especially through the European Research Area, of course, and ERAC, which is one of the governing bodies, and with the European Parliament, also mainly through STOA, the panel for the future of science and technology. And also we are involved or engaging with different transnational fora like ESAF, the European Science Advisory Forum, or INSA, the International Network for Governmental Science Advice. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up, I will present our timeline. So this whole journey on science for policy at the Commission started with the Commission staff working document of October 22. That's basically set the framework that now we are using for our activities. Then 1 year after, we had a Science for Policy in Europe conference in Brussels that also continue to build the momentum and to engage with different stakeholders. And then that process culminated in the Council conclusions that I mentioned before in December 23 under the Spanish presidency. And then this June, we started the mutual learning exercise, as I mentioned, in Leuven, our first meeting that will end in May. Then in April or May, is to be confirmed, we hope that the ERA policy agenda 25-27 is adopted. So we can also start our activities in Science for Policy under the ERA. And finally, in May 25, we'll have a Science for Policy conference organized by the Scientific Advice Mechanism of the European Commission in Vienna, together with the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And it will also include the final event of our mutual learning exercise, but also many other sessions on science for policy. And I hope to see also some of you there if you're interested. The information is also in the notes, so feel free, please, to have a look. And the next slide, please. Yeah, so I also like to thank you for your attention, and please keep in touch. So these are my contact details. Thank you very much.